I'm going to start out today by sharing with you the ordeal of a Chinese student in lieu of learning the English grammar. Let me read it for you. As for grammar, personally, it is the most tedious thing which I could not grasp completely till now. And what I can do is just to be corrected in written or spoken English by native speakers consistently. When I first encountered English grammar, it was not difficult, but just a matter of memorizing the key sentences and patterns by repeating and translating. Then we would be drilled repeatedly with the same pattern to consolidate them in our mind. And when I was in secondary school, in order to make us understand grammar, the teacher would give us plenty of drills to do like matching, gap filling, and close testing. But the most important thing is we still cannot grasp the grammar. Though we correct the wrong answers in drills, we forget all the items after just a couple of days. Thus, it is a difficult thing for me to acquire grammar. However, developing a language sense is the sort of thing I get used to doing during my advanced English learning. Are you also facing the same dilemma and difficulty when teaching grammar to your students? Well, this chapter first looks at different types of grammar and then selects some areas of grammatical research into L2 learning to represent the main approaches. For 2.1, the question is, what is grammar? Under it, there are focusing questions. First is, what is grammar? Second, how do you think it is learned? Third, how would you teach it? Before I delve into the topic, let me go over the keywords first. Prescriptive grammar. This is a grammar that prescribes what people should or should not say. On the other hand, traditional grammar or school grammar concerned with labeling sentences with parts of speech and so on. Next, structural grammar. Structural grammar is concerned with how words go into phrases and phrases into sentences. And lastly, grammatical or linguistic competence, the knowledge of language stored in a person's mind. Gave a while ago gave you an idea about what grammar is. But accordingly, it is best and easiest if we start by eliminating what it does not mean in the context of L2 learning. So, let's delve deeper into prescriptive grammar. What is it? So it is one familiar type of grammar where the rules are found in school books. For example, the warnings against final prepositions in sentences. This can be put up with, or the diatribes in letters to the newspaper about split infinitives, such as the Star Trek motto, to boldly go where no one has gone before. This is called prescriptive grammar because it prescribes what people ought to do. For modern grammarians, they mostly avoided prescriptive grammar because they see their job as describing what the rules of language are. The grammarian has no more right to decree how people should speak than the physicist has to decree how electrons should move. Their task is to describe what happens. Prescriptive grammar is all but irrelevant to the language teaching classroom. Since the 1960s, people have believed that you should teach the language as it is, not as it ought to be, such as descriptively and not prescriptively. Students should learn to speak real language that people actually use, not in an artificial ideal form that nobody uses. We all use split infinitives from time to time when the circumstances make it necessary, and it's often awkward to avoid them. Popular meaning of grammar concerns the parts of speech. The fact that a noun is a word that is the name of a person, place, thing, or idea has been absorbed by every school pupil in England. This definition came out or straight from Tapestry Writing 1 by Pike Bakey 2000. This was published in the year 2000, but there has been a little difference from William Cobbett's definition in 1819. For William, his definition was nouns are the names of persons and things. So there are some sources for these. So for the modern useful source is the online NASA manual, MacGaskill 1990. So it provides sensible practical advice in largely traditional terms. Say for example, the subject and verb should be the most important elements of a sentence. Too many modifiers, particularly between the subject and verb, can overpower the elements. A really good source book too is Essential Grammar in Use by Murphy in 2012. And then even the main course books often rely on the students knowing the terms of traditional grammar. So for English Unlimited or AI or A1, it is an appendix grammar reference that uses technical terms in English, subject, pronouns, possessive adjectives, negative, object pronouns, and statements. In language teaching, it has also made use of structural grammar, which is based on the concept of phrase structure. For phrase structure, it is usually presented in tree diagrams, just like what you can see in the picture or in the illustration. This tree diagram shows how words build up into phrases and phrases build up into sentences. Thus, structural grammar describes how the elements of the sentence fit together in an overall structure built up from larger and larger structures. A quick trivia. Did you know that teachers have been using structural grammar directly in substitution tables since at least the 1920s? So this is a typical example that can be seen in the Bulgarian course book, English for the 5th class. So this is figure 2.2. So if you notice, these represent the same information as the phrase structure tree, just like what I have presented in the previous slide. But the difference is it's turned on its side, with some alternative vocabulary items specified. So these graphic displays of grammar are still common in present-day course books and grammar books. The implication is that sentences are constructed by making choices from left to right, and indeed they were often used as a way of getting students to make up sentences in this chapter or in this fashion. So these structure drills and pattern practice draw on similar ideas of structure as in the following exercise. You can go and I see him. Well, if I go, he can come and ask you. Well, if he comes, they can write and tell her. The students replace the verb each time within the structure well. If pronoun verb, then in the present tense for possible conditions. SLA research relies mainly on another meaning of grammar. That is the knowledge of language that the speaker possesses in the mind, known as linguistic or grammatical competence. By grammatical competence, according to Chomsky, he means that, or I mean, the cognitive state that encompasses all those aspects of form and meaning and their relation, including underlying structures that enter into that relation, which are properly assigned to the specific subsystem of the human mind that relates to representations of form and meaning. All speakers know the grammar of their language and the slang or the sense of language. It is a mental state without having to study it. So for a speaker of English, they know that there is something wrong with is John is the man who French, even if you're not looking at any book. The native speaker knows the system of the language. So it is an implicit knowledge below the level of consciousness. And also, other than that, we have what we call communicative competence. So, this communicative competence for native speakers, they possess knowledge of how language is used. And the other one is also what we call pragmatic competence, wherein it reflects all the possible uses of language rather than restricting them to communication. Writing, mental arithmetic, keeping a diary, making a shopping list, and many others. In other words, there is no denying that there is more to language than grammar. So a lot of linguists see it as the invisible central spine that holds everything else together. Agree that grammar is a typical medley of traditional and structural items. So there is a clear representation or presentation of this, which can be found in Harmer 2007. Let's take a look at the different box, or the first box, 2.1, Grammar for Beginners. So these are the elements of English grammar common to lessons 1 to 5 of 3 modern beginner books for adults with examples. Present of to be, it's in Japan, I'm Mark, he's Jack, Kennedy's nephew. Articles AN, I'm a student. She is an old woman. It's an exciting place. Subject pronoun, she's Italian. I've got 2 brothers and a sister. Do you have black or white coffee? And 4, in and from with places. You ask the woman in the street the time. I'm from India. She lives in London. 5, 9 pronouns. Boys, parents, Sanchez. Continue. For box 2.3, the types of grammar are or can be 1. It could be a way of telling people what they ought to say rather than reporting what they do say, or the prescriptive grammar, if you can remember. 2. A system for describing sentence structure used in English schools for centuries based on grammars of classical languages such as Latin or traditional grammar. 3. A system for describing sentences based on the idea of smaller structures built up into larger structures, or the structural grammar. And the 4th is the knowledge of the structural regularities of language in the minds of speakers, such as the linguistic grammatical competence. And last one, AFL grammar combining elements of 2 and 3. Moving on to the next part of the topic, we have 2.2, which is composed of structure words, morphemes, and sequence of acquisition. So these are the focusing questions. Number 1, what do you understand by a structure or function word? 2, What do you think are the main characteristics of beginner sentences in English or another modern language? Take a look at the keywords. First is the order of difficulty. This is a scale of difficulty for particular aspects of grammar for L2 learners. Second, sequence of acquisition, the order in which L2 learners acquire the grammar, pronunciation, and so on of the language. The example by Theodore Sturgeon's story combines made-up content words with real structure words. These would actually tell us that the same sentences with made-up structure words might have read Sukil Marston decision skill great mark miserable slaves his wolves formulated dear still grace jumped cup survived. Well, if we notice, only the first version is comprehensible in some form even if we have no idea how you further and font. So these would show that content words have meanings that can be looked up in a dictionary and they are numbered in many thousands. Beer and palimpsest are content words referring to definable things. A new content word can be easily invented. Advertisers try to do it all the time, contains the magic new ingredient kryptonite. Well, if we're talking about, or if we talk about structured words, on the other hand, they are limited in number, consisting of words like the, to, and get. So a computer program for teaching English needs about 220 structured words. Now, the 10 most common words in the British National Corpus 100 million sample are all structured words. So we will see more about that in chapter 3. So structured words are described best in grammar books rather than dictionaries. So I think that's where you could tell or find the distinction. Are you still confused and cannot tell the fine line between this distinction of content words and structured words? So let's take a look at, or let's just go over this quickly. So content words, they are found in the dictionary book. Structured words, these are in the grammar books, are in the grammar the. So book, example, it's noun, the, article. So it exists in large numbers. That's the content words. But for the structured words, it's just, let's say, limited. So let's just say, for example, 220. So see that disparity, which is really huge. So it vary in frequency, book versus on while structure words are high frequency to the eye, are more used in written language, that's the content words, while structure words are often used in spoken language. Are more likely to be preceded by a pause in speech, that's the content word. On the other hand, it can less likely to be preceded by a pause in speech. Okay. And it says fixed stress or stresses such as pilot, content word, are stress for emphasis, etc. The. Okay. Have more than two letters, I or an. Then for the structure words can consist of one or two letters I, which is the letter I, and an an article, are pronounced with an initial voiceless, let's say, th, theory, are pronounced with an internal voice there. Initial voiced th, which is there. New ones can always be invented, cyberpunk. New ones are almost never invented. All right. So I guess that gave you a lot of idea and really proved that you could now easily tell and distinguish content words and structure words. It is important to mention that most linguist grammars rely on a unit called morpheme. So is defined as the smallest element of grammar that has meaning. So some words consist of a single morpheme, to, to, book, like, or black. Some words can have inflections added to their grammatical role in the sentence, say book, book plus s, or blacker, black plus er. Others can split up into several morphemes. Mini supermarket. Hamburger, so we have ham, made of ham, or hamburger made of ham rather than hamburger. Person from Hamburg, Germany. When the phrase structure of a sentence is shown in tree diagrams, the whole sentence is the tree top and the morphemes are the roots at the bottom. The morpheme is the point at which the structure can be split no more. The structure and behavior of morphemes is dealt with the area of grammar called morphology. So in some SLA research, grammatical inflections like ing are grouped together with structure words like to as grammatical morphemes. Do Alto learners learn grammatical morphemes? So Heidi Dule and Marina Burt decided to study that area. So they had this 1 to 8 sequence which mirrors the order of difficulty for Alto learners. So they made Spanish-speaking children learning English describe pictures and checked how often they supplied 8 grammatical morphemes in the appropriate places in the sentence. So the result of that is these Spanish-speaking students have least difficulty with plural s, but have the most difficulty with possessive s. So if you can see the sequence 1, that means that is the easiest for them, while sequence 8 would mean that it's the most difficult. And another interesting discovery was that the similarities between the Alto learners, it was not just Spanish-speaking children who have the sequence of difficulty for the 8 grammatical morphemes. Similar orders have been found for Japanese children and for Korean adults, though not for one Japanese child. The first language did not seem to have a crucial difference. All Alto learners have much the same order. Not forget what interlanguage is. Learners from many backgrounds seem to be creating the same kind of grammar for English out of what they heard, and we are passing through more or less the same stages of acquisition. They were acting in the same way to the shared experience of learning English. It's also been a finding that researchers had. They found a basic grammar that all L2 learners shared, and this has 3 simple rules. A noun phrase followed by a verb, optionally followed by another noun phrase will take bread. A noun phrase followed by a copula and another NP or an adjective, it's bread. A verb followed by a noun phrase pinching its. On the early acquisition of Alto grammar. Content and structure words differ in many ways, including the way they are used in sentences and how they are pronounced. Grammatical morphemes, structure words, and grammatical inflections are learned in a particular sequence in L2 acquisition. Last one, L2 learners acquire the same basic language virtually regardless of the first and second languages. Next part is 2.3, which is all about the processability model. So the questions are, do you find problems in following certain structures in your L2 or indeed your L1? Why do you think you find some structures more difficult to follow than others? The keywords that we have to take note of in this topic is sequence of development, processability, and the teachability hypothesis. There has been an attempt that has been made to create a broader based sequence of development, which is first called the multidimensional model and later on has been changed to processability model. It believed that the explanation for a sequence must lie in the expanding capacity of the learner's mind to handle the grammar of L2 sentences. The core idea was that some sentences are formed by moving elements from one to position to another. So here, the multidimensional model sees movement as the key element in understanding the learning sequence. So these are the stages of multidimensional model. So for stage one, the learners can produce only one word. Second, learners acquire the typical order of the language. The third stage is the learner starts to move elements to the beginning of the sentence. Later on the fourth stage, the learner discovers how the preposition can be separated from its phrase in English. The fifth stage is where the learners are starting to work within the structure of the sentence, not just the beginning or the end, as locations to move elements to. And the last is stage 6, which is the stage wherein the learner has already acquired the order of subordinate clauses. So what is the distinction between multidimensional model versus processability model? So processability model is actually the recent development of multidimensional model. It explains these sequences in terms of the grammatical processes involved in the production of sentences. And this is how it works. One, the learner gets access to individual content words, see, car. Second, the learner gets access to grammatical structure words, see, the car, called the category procedure. Third, the learner assembles these into phrases, we see, the car, the phrasal procedure. Fourth, the learner puts the phrases together within the sentence. You will see the car, the as procedure. Fifth, and the last one, the learner can work with both main clauses and subordinate clauses. If he looks out of the window, he will see the car, the subordinate clause procedure. If all students have to acquire language in more or less the same sequence, the teacher can only fit in with it. This processability model leads to the teachability hypothesis, which is an L2 structure, can be learned from instruction only if the learner's interlanguage is close to the point when this structure is acquired in the natural setting. Feynman, 1984. So these are the suggestions when teaching your students. First, do not teach the third person S ending of present tense verbs in he likes at early stages, as it inevitably comes late. Second, in the early stages, concentrate on the main word order of subject, verb, object. Cats like milk, and do not expect learners to learn the word order of questions. What do cats like, etc. until much later. Introduce sentence initial verbs in summer I play tennis as a way into the movement involved in questions. Do you like Ram? Let's now move on. And now we 2.4 Principles and Parameters Grammar. The focusing questions are: do you think that you learned your first language entirely from your parents, or do you think some of it was already present in your mind? If you came from Mars, what would you say all human languages had in common? The key word under here is loan, and that is universal grammar, which means the language faculty built into the human mind consisting of principles and parameters. Let us define what is universal grammar. Universal grammar is associated with Noam Chomsky. This version of the universal grammar that emerged in the 1980s sees the knowledge of grammar in the mind is made up of two components: principles that all languages have in common, and two parameters on which they vary. All human minds are believed to honor the common principles that are forced on them by the nature of the human minds that all their speakers share. For the principles of language, the proposed principle is locality. It says that such movement has to be local, such as within the same area of structure, rather than across areas of structure that span the whole sentence. So for example, how do you explain to a student how to make English questions such as, is Sam the cat that is black? One possible instruction is to describe the movement involved. Start from the sentence, Sam is a cat that is black, and move the second word is to the beginning. This is satisfactorily for this one example. But then, if the students use this rule, they would go completely wrong with sentences such as the old man is the one who's late, producing all the man is the one who's late. To patch it up, you might suggest move the copula is to the beginning of the sentence. So the students can now produce, is the old man the one who is late? But suppose the student wanted to make a question out of Sam is the cat that is black, as well as producing the same sentence, is Sam the cat that is black? The rule also allows is Sam is the cat that black? It is obvious that to us all that no one would ever dream of producing this question. But why not? It is just as possible logically to move one is as the other. Parameters of variation. Variation is whether the grammatical subject of a declarative sentence has to be actually present in the sentence. In German, it is possible to say spricht, he speaks, but impossible to say spricht speaks. Declarative sentences must have subject. The same is true for French, for English, and for many great languages. But in Italian, while it's possible to say il parla, he talks, it is far more unusual to say parla talks without an express subject. Declarative sentences are not required to have subjects. The same is true in Arabic and Chinese and many other languages. This variation is captured by the pro-drop parameter, also known as the null-subject parameter. In pro-drop languages such as Italian, Chinese, or Arabic, the subject doesn't need to be actually present. In non-pro-drop languages such as English or German, it must always be present in declarative sentences. The pro-drop parameter variation has effects on the grammars of all languages. Each of them is either pro-drop or non-pro-drop. Now we are on 2.5, L2 learning of grammar and L2 teaching. The focusing questions are the following. What do you think is easy grammar for a beginner? 2. What do you think is the best order for teaching? The learning of grammar has turned out to be wider and deeper than anyone supposed. It ranges from morphemes such as the to processes of sentence production to parameters about the presence of subject pronouns. Most of all, grammar is knowledge in the mind, not rules in the book. And the end product, which is crucial of much teaching, is the students should know language in an unconscious sense so that they can put it to good use. Teaching us to pay attention to the internal processes and knowledge are subconsciously building up in their minds. Verb form sequence in Speak Out, Yales and Oaks 2012. B. Present tense form. 2. Present simple. 3. Past simple regular. 4. Past simple irregular. I like plus ing forms. 6. Can and can't. 7. Be going to. Grammar has relevance to the sequence in which elements of language are taught. It is necessary, or is it out of necessity, that language teaching has to present the various aspects of language in order rather than introduce them all simultaneously. There are four extreme points of view on SLA research that often claim that there are definite orders for learning language. The first point of view is ignore the part of grammar that have a particular L2 learning sequence, as a learner will follow these automatically in any case. 2. Follow the L2 learning order as closely as possible in the teaching. 3. Teach the last things in an L2 learning sequence first. And 4. Ignore grammar altogether. We're down to the last part of my presentation, 2.6, which is about the role of explicit grammar in language teaching. The focusing questions are the following. First, did hearing about grammar from your teacher help you learn a second language? In what way? Second, how aware are you of grammar when you are speaking? A, your first language, and second, your second language. This topic, let's take a look at the keywords. Consciousness raising, language awareness, sensitization, focus on form S, focus on form FONF. What is explicit grammar teaching? Usually, this is the kind of grammar involved in traditional or structural grammar, which has been described earlier. These were exemplified in books such as Essential Grammar in Use by Murphy, and seldom does it mean grammar in the sense of knowledge. What is its implication? L2 learning is different from L1 learning where it never occurs. The belief that L2 learning can potentially make use of explanation underlies distinctions such as those made by Harold Palmer in 1926 between spontaneous capacities for acquiring speech and the studial capacity through which people study language, and by question in 1981 between acquisition and learning, the latter being conscious and available only to older learners, and by many others. Is an alternative possibility is that raising awareness of language in general helps second language learning. Eric Hawkins suggested that the learner's general awareness of language should be raised before they start learning the L2, partly through grammar. An issue in recent research is how focus and form contributes to students' learning. For Mike Long in 1991, Focus and form overtly draws students' attention to linguistic elements, as they arise incidentally in lessons whose overriding focus is on meaning or communication. Grammatical items or structures may be brought to the student's attention by using graphic or auditory device, but it should not distort the patterns of the language. For a research by Joanna White in 1998, he drew the students' attention to the forms of grammar, such as pronouns, by printing them in italic or boldface. My presentation, let me end it with some reminders about grammar and language teaching. The first one is teachers have to be aware of the many ways in which grammar comes into language learning and use the many types of grammar that exist in choosing which grammar to teach and how to teach it. Alto learners go through distinct stages of acquisition for reasons still only partially understood. Teaching can utilize the known facts about these stages in several ways. Many aspects of grammar do not need to be taught as they are already present in the learner's mind and need instead to be activated. Conscious explanation of the altered grammar is seen as beneficial in some circumstances as is raising of language awareness. And that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Carmela Tingzon, and you can now ask questions.